She set the basket down at my feet before she said good morning. Blue plastic, cracked handle, the kind you carry wet laundry in. She put it on the floor of my grandmother's kitchen at 7:40 in the morning, and she said, "Take what is yours and be out by Sunday." 6 years I lived in that house. 6 years I fed that woman, bathed her, counted her pills into a paper cup, and sat up with her at 3 in the morning when she got frightened and could not say why. I was never paid $1. Here is what the woman holding that basket did not know I would ever find out. For the last 2 of those years, somebody was being paid $440 a week to do exactly what I was doing. Every Friday, like clockwork, my hands did the work. Her name was on the paper. I left that morning with $11, that basket, and a stack of spiral notebooks I could not have explained taking if you had stopped me at the door and asked. Today, I read timesheets for a living. I work for the state. I look at the paperwork that says who took care of whose mother, and when, and for how long, and I find the places where the paper and the human being do not match. Last winter, I finally read the paperwork with my grandmother's name on it. I never raised my voice. I never had to. I filled out the forms. My name is Nora Vance. I am 34 years old, and I live in Providence, Rhode Island. If you have ever been the one who stayed, the one everybody called a saint, the one nobody ever offered $1 or a single day off, stay with me, because the most ordinary thing in that house turned out to be the only honest witness in it, and it was sitting in a laundry basket under my bed for 4 years. I am going to take you back to the beginning once, and then walk you forward, one jump back, then straight ahead. 6 years before that morning with the basket, I buried my mother. She was 51. She went to bed with a headache and did not wake up. I was 22, 3 semesters into a nursing program at the community college. The reception was at my grandmother's house on Wilbur Avenue. Ham, folding chairs. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She had already had her first stroke by then. The small one. The one that took the strength out of her left hand and some of the words out of her mouth and left her entirely herself behind her eyes. She sat in the wing chair by the window and held my hand so hard my rings left marks. My aunt found me in the kitchen. Aunt Bev, my mother's older sister, 56. A lot of beige. A way of lowering her voice that made you feel like you were being let in on something. She said, "Somebody's got to be with Ruth now." And then she said it. "We don't bill family, Nora. That is not who we are." Hear that sentence. Tantin, you are going to hear it again. She said it like a hymn, like she was doing me a favor by including me in it. I moved into my grandmother's house. 11 days later, I was 22. I told myself it was for a few months. I put 4 textbooks and 1 3-ring binder into a cardboard box, and I wrote the word nursing on the side of it with a marker, and I set it on a shelf in the basement, next to my grandmother's Christmas decorations. I did not open that box again for 6 years. The first year was not a betrayal. I need to be honest about that, or you will not believe the rest. The first year was love. Ruth taught me to make her mother's bread, one hand in her lap, directing, merciless. Too much flour. Not enough. Not do it again. She was happier in that hour than she had been since the funeral. She had an egg timer, shaped like a little white hen. She used it for the bread. Later, when things got worse, I used it for her medication. That hen sat on the counter for 6 years. Here is the part everything else depends on. Ruth was confused about days of the week. She was confused about whether her sister was alive. Toward the end, she was confused about my name. She was never confused about who was in the room. And in 6 years, my Aunt Bev was in that room 109 times. I know the number because I wrote it down. I wrote everything down. From the first week, I kept a log, not for legal reasons. God. No. I was 22. I had been handed a stroke patient and a shoebox of prescriptions and no supervision. And I was terrified of killing her by accident. So every day, in a spiral notebook, in ballpoint pen, I wrote the date at the top of the page. And then I wrote it all down. 8 a.m. Blood pressure, 142/88. 8:10 a.m. 2 pills. Half a banana. She ate all of it. 11:30 p.m. Awake and scared. Saturday with her. She asked for her sister. I told her her sister was fine. 6 years of that. 1 page a day. Sometimes 2. 98-cent notebooks from the pharmacy on Broad Street. And when one filled up, I dated the cover and started another. I thought I was writing down her medicine. Stay with me, because that is the whole story. And I did not know it yet. 8 months in. That is how I am going to mark time for you. By the way, everything in this story gets measured off that morning. With the basket. 8 months in means 8 months after I moved into Ruth's house, which is 5 years and 4 months before the morning. She handed it to me. 8 months in, I asked for help, not money. Help. Help. There was a home care agency in Cranston that sent aides out by the hour, and I asked my aunt for 2 afternoons a week, Tuesday and Thursday, enough to finish my last 2 semesters and sit for the licensing exam. I asked her in that kitchen, standing up, because I was too nervous to sit down. She let it get quiet first. She was very good at letting it get quiet. Then she said, "Nora, there isn't any money." She explained it patiently, the way you explain a bus schedule to a child. There was Social Security. There was a small pension from the mill office. The house was paid off, but a house is not cash. Every dollar Ruth had was going to Ruth's care. It all goes to her, Bev said. That is what it is for. And then, softer, with her hand on my arm, we don't bill family. I said, okay. I said, I understood. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in my dead mother's childhood bedroom. And I did not cry, and I did not call anybody. And the next morning I got up at 6 and made her oatmeal. I believed her. That is the part that is hard to say out loud. I was 23, and I believed her completely. For 4 more years, there was money. I am going to show you exactly where it went, and it will take a court document to get there. And I need you to remember this kitchen when we do. 2 years in, Ruth had her second stroke on a Sunday in the spring, not the small kind. After that, she needed help getting from the chair to the bathroom. She stopped being able to write. The words started arriving late. She would reach for one and find it 40 seconds later, and by then the sentence had left without it. 2 weeks after that, my aunt came to the house with a folder. This is the first thing in this story that is a crime, and it happened in the most boring way you can imagine. No shouting. Nobody hid anything. A kitchen table, a Wednesday afternoon, the radio on. Bev brought a lawyer with her. A young guy, in a tan suit. He set out 3 copies of a document and explained it to Ruth in a loud, slow voice, the way people talk to the elderly and to dogs. The document was a power of attorney. That is a piece of paper that lets somebody else spend your money, as if it were their own. That is all it is. It does not go to a judge. Nobody checks on it. You sign one sheet on a Wednesday, and from that Wednesday on, another person can move your money and sign your name. And nobody is watching. Ruth signed it. She was in her chair. Her good hand shook. She got halfway through the R and stopped, and my aunt reached over and steadied her wrist, and Ruth finished it. And then Ruth looked up at the young lawyer and said, very clearly, "Now what is this for?" And he said, "It is just so your daughter can help you, ma'am." And my grandmother said, "Which one?" Ruth had 2 daughters. One of them was in the ground. The other one was steadying her wrist. Nobody in that kitchen answered her. The lawyer laughed a little, the way you laugh when an old woman says something you have decided not to understand. And he tapped the second page and said, "Right here, ma'am." She asked what it was for one more time before they left. "That is twice." I was standing at the sink with a dish towel in my hands, and I did not say anything. I was 24. There was a lawyer in the room. I assumed the lawyer was the adult. That night, at 11:40 p.m., after I got her into bed, I sat at the kitchen table, and I opened my notebook, and I wrote down what I always wrote down: her blood pressure, her pills, and what she ate. And then, at the bottom of the page, out of nothing but the habit of writing down everything that happened to that woman in a day, I wrote 3 more lines. 2:40 p.m. Lawyer here. With Bev. Ruth signed a paper. She asked twice what it was. Nobody told her. I did not know why I wrote it. I did not think it was important. It sat on that page, in that notebook, in a cardboard box, under a bed, in a basement, for 6 years and 4 months. When my lawyer read that page out loud in her office last winter, she stopped talking for a full 10 seconds. Then, she said one word. She said, "Okay," and she picked up the phone. Stay with me. That page is a bomb, and I want you to remember where I buried it, because it is going to go off in about 20 minutes, and when it does, I want you to hear it coming from a long way back. 4 years in. 2 years before the morning, with the basket. This is the one you need to hold on to. I came downstairs on a Tuesday afternoon, and there was my aunt at the kitchen table, with papers spread out in front of her, and a pen, and my grandmother in her chair, by the window with her eyes closed. I asked what she was working on. She did not cover it up. She did not flinch. She said, "Insurance paperwork for her long-term care. It is a nightmare, honey. You don't want to know." She said, "You don't want to know," and I said okay. And I went to the pharmacy. That is the entire scene. I was in the room for 40 seconds. I have replayed those 40 seconds more times than I can tell you. Because that afternoon, at that table, my aunt signed a document called a Personal Care Services Agreement. That is a contract that says a family member is being hired and paid properly on the books to take care of an elderly relative every day. They are legal. They are common. Lawyers recommend them. There is nothing wrong with one. Ruth did not sign it. Ruth could not sign anything by then. Bev signed it twice. Once on behalf of Ruth, using the power of attorney. The paper Ruth had asked about twice and gotten an answer to 0 times. Then a second time, on the other line, in her own name, she hired herself. $22 an hour, 20 hours a week. She was the buyer, the seller, and the witness, and my grandmother was asleep in the chair, 6 feet away, and I was at the pharmacy. And then I came home and made dinner for the woman I was apparently not qualified to be paid to take care of. That agreement stayed in force for 260 weeks, $440 a week. 260 weeks. $114,400. Do not do that math with me. I already did it. Let me tell you what that number actually is. Because a number is nothing until you can feel it. That is more than my grandmother paid for that house. That is $114,000, taken out of the accounts of a woman who could not remember what day it was, in exchange for work that was being done every single day on every single one of those 260 weeks by a 24-year-old with no license and a cardboard box in the basement with the word nursing written on the side of it. If you have ever been told there is no money, and then found out later exactly where the money was, you already know the sound that makes in your chest. It is not anger. Anger comes later. The first sound is much quieter than that. It is the sound of every kind thing you were ever told being reweighed. 5 years and 2 months in, 10 months before the basket. Christmas. We did it at Ruth's house because Ruth could not travel, which meant I cooked for 11 people in a kitchen I had been cleaning by myself since I was 22. My cousin Danny drove up from Warwick. He is Bev's son. He fixes air conditioners. He does not like conflict. And I want you to remember him because he is the only person in that family who comes out of this. Danny brought me a bottle of wine and said, "You look tired." That was the most attentive thing anybody said to me that year. At dinner, my aunt held court. She had a way of narrating other people's lives at a table, warmly, like she was handing out gifts. She got to me last. She put her hand on the back of my chair and said, "To the whole table, and Nora's here, helping out with Mum while she figures out what she wants to do." Helping out. I was 27. I had not had a day off in 5 years. That afternoon, I had changed her bedsheets twice, filled a pill organizer for the week, called the pharmacy about a shortage, and cooked a turkey. I said nothing. I passed the potatoes. And then Ruth, at the head of the table, looked down at me with her whole face lit up and said, "Sit down, sweetheart. You've done enough." Except, she did not say Nora. She said my mother's name. She called me by her dead daughter's name, in front of 11 people, at Christmas, and somebody laughed. Not cruelly. It was the little, embarrassed laugh people make when the old lady says something sad. Then the table moved on, and nobody looked at me, and I sat there, holding a serving spoon. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because I know what these stories usually sound like. I cry exactly one time in this entire story, and it is not here, and it is not in front of any of them. I got up. I cleared the plates. I stood at the sink with my hands in hot water for a long time, and I thought, nobody at this table has ever once asked me what I do all day. They knew Ruth was alive and clean and safe, and every one of them had quietly decided that this was simply the weather, that Ruth was doing well, that the house ran itself. 6 years, and not one of them ever asked to see the notebooks. If you have ever been the invisible engine under somebody else's family, if you have ever been the reason things are fine and been thanked for helping out, I want you to type one word in the comments. Type, "stayed," just that. I read them, and I want to know how many of us there are. Stay with me. In 10 months, I asked one question, and it cost me my home. 2 days before, after the power of attorney, Ruth's bank statements stopped coming to Ruth's house. They started going to my aunt's address in East Greenwich instead. But on a Thursday in October, one came to the house anyway. A paper statement, mailed to Wilbur Avenue, because a clerk somewhere typed something wrong. That is not a coincidence, rescuing me. It is a clerical error that handed me one piece of information. 4 years, Too late. Everything I did afterward, I did the long way, the legal way, the expensive way. I opened it because it had my grandmother's name on it, and I was the one who paid her pharmacy bill. And I saw a line item, withdrawal, the same amount, over and over, on a schedule. I did not look at that statement and see fraud. I was 28. I had not sat in a classroom in 6 years, and I looked at it and felt stupid. So I called my aunt and asked the most reasonable question anybody has ever asked. Bev, what is this money that goes out every week? The pause lasted 4 seconds. I know, because I was standing at the counter, watching the little white hen count down 12 minutes for Ruth's afternoon pills. And I watched the dial move. Then she said, warmly, "Oh, honey, that is the care account. Don't worry about that." And then she said, "You shouldn't be opening her mail." 2 days later, she was in that kitchen with a laundry basket. The morning. 0. This is the morning. Everything else is measured from. I have gone over it so many times that it has stopped being a memory and started being a transcript. Sunday, 7:40. In the morning. I had been up since 5:20. Ruth had had a bad night, calling for her sister again, and I had sat on the floor beside her bed with my back against the nightstand until she went under. I was at the stove. Oatmeal going. The little white hen set for 4 minutes. The front door opened without a knock because she had a key, because it was her mother's house. She came in, carrying 2 things: a blue plastic laundry basket and a single sheet of paper. She set the basket on the floor. She set the paper on the table and smoothed it flat with the side of her hand. Twice, the way you smooth a tablecloth. She said, "Take what is yours and be out by Sunday." I turned off the burner. I said, "What?" She did not raise her voice. She never once raised her voice. Not in 6 years. Not in any of it. And that is what this actually looks like. It does not look like screaming. It looks like a woman in a beige cardigan, being very reasonable at 7:40 in the morning. She said, "The families talked about it. It isn't healthy for you to be here. You are 28, Nora. You have no career, no partner, no life. We've been enabling that. We've been enabling that." Then she turned the sheet of paper around to face me. 2 columns, made in a spreadsheet program, and printed on a home printer with the toner low. So the bottom third was gray. The left column was dates. 72 rows. 1 for every month. I had lived in that house. The right column said $400. At the bottom, in bold, was the total, $28,800. And under that, a line for a signature. She had brought me a bill. Room and board. 6 years of it. At $400 a month, with a line for me to sign acknowledging that I owed it. And if I signed, she explained, in that same warm, patient voice, she would consider the debt forgiven, and there would be no hard feelings, and it could all be handled inside the family. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen and looked at an invoice for the 6 years I had spent taking care of my grandmother, and I laughed. Not a big laugh. One breath, out through my nose. I said, "You told me we don't bill family." And she looked at me, and I will remember this for the rest of my life. And I have never been able to decide whether she knew what she was saying, or whether it was the truest accident of her life. She looked at me, and she said, "We don't. That is why I am giving you the chance to sign it now." I did not sign it. I went upstairs. I took the basket with me. My whole adult life fit in it. And there was room left over. 5 shirts, beside 2 pairs of jeans, a coat, my mother's watch, the charger for a phone I was 2 months behind on, Then, I went down to the basement. Everybody always wants that moment to be strategic. It was not. I was not building a case. I was a person whose hands were shaking too hard to fold a shirt properly. I looked at the shelf where the Christmas decorations were, and next to them was the cardboard box with the word nursing on the side in marker. And I did not take it. I left it. I left my own name for what I was going to be. On a shelf. In a basement. In a house I was being evicted from at 7:40 in the morning. What I took was the other box. 14 spiral notebooks. 98 cents apiece. 6 years of dates and blood pressures and doses. And one line, one Wednesday. 4 years earlier. About a lawyer. I took them because they had her medicine in them. That is the only reason. Nobody else in that family knew her doses, and I stood in that basement in total collapse with exactly one clear thought. They will get her pills wrong. I put 14 notebooks in a blue laundry basket, on top of 5 shirts. Then, I went to say goodbye to my grandmother. She was in her chair, by the window. The light was that thin, white October light. She had her good hand on the armrest, and she was looking out at the street. I crouched down next to her and I said, "I have to go for a little while." And she said, clearly, in one piece, better than she had spoken in a year. Then, "Who is going to do it?" I said. "Bev is." Ruth looked at me, and she did not say anything, because by that point in her life she could not always find the words. But she turned her hand over on the armrest, palm up, and she waited until I put my hand in it. She held it, hard enough to hurt, the way she had held it at my mother's funeral. That was the last time I ever touched her. I walked out the front door with a laundry basket at 8:15 in the morning, and I sat in my car at the end of Wilbur Avenue. And that is the one time in this story that I cried. It lasted about 90 seconds. It was not beautiful, and there was nobody there to see it. Then I wiped my face on the sleeve of my coat and drove to a motel on Route 2 that charged $59 a night. You do not get to see me cry again. Not once. Not in a courtroom. Not in a hallway. Not on the phone. People ask why I did not fight, why I did not scream in that kitchen and refuse to leave. Because she had a piece of paper that said the house was hers to manage, and I had nothing but 6 years, and a good reason, and I had just learned exactly what a piece of paper is worth, against a good reason. So, I went and got some paper. 6 weeks after that morning, I got a job. Not a good one. I walked into a home care agency in Cranston, the same agency I had begged for 2 afternoons a week, 5.5 years earlier. And because I had 6 years of experience and no license, they hired me as a home health aide at $15.25 an hour on overnights, which nobody else wanted. Overnights are sitting in a stranger's living room from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in case an 80-year-old man needs help getting to the bathroom. I was the best they had, and I say that with no pride at all. I had been doing that job for 6 years with no relief, no training, and nobody to call. My supervisor on nights was a woman named Yolanda, 51, 26 years, an aide, a voice, like a door closing. 6 weeks in, I broke. 3 in the morning, a client's house in Pawtucket. She found me on the back step, and I told her the whole thing badly. Out of order, the way you tell a thing when it is still bleeding. The basket, the bill, for $28,800. 6 years. A withdrawal on a bank statement I did not understand. And then I said the thing I think half the people watching this have said out loud in a car at some point, but I can't prove any of it. It is just my word. Yolanda did not hug me. She did not tell me it would be okay. She looked out at the yard and she said, "Baby, that is what the notebook is for." I said, I didn't know what she meant. And then she said, "The sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. Write it down. Every time. Every day. Doesn't matter if it is boring. They can argue with you. They cannot argue with the page." Then she stood up and told me my client needed turning, because she was not a woman who let a moment go on too long. I drove back to the motel at 6:30 in the morning. I stood in the doorway of room 14 and looked at the blue laundry basket on the floor at the end of the bed. My clothes in it, 14 spiral notebooks stacked on top. 6 years. Sect. 98 cents a piece. Every day. I sat down on the floor and opened the first one and read April 4th, 8 a.m. Blood pressure, 138/84. 2 pills, half a banana. She ate all of it. Sang in the kitchen. And I understood the shape of what I was holding, not the whole thing. Not for another 3 years. But the shape. It is not evidence when you write it. It is only evidence later. You cannot go back and manufacture 6 years of ordinary Tuesdays. I bought a new notebook that afternoon at a gas station for $1.19, and I wrote the date at the top of the page. And I wrote down my shift, my hours, my pay, and the $59 I paid for the motel room. I have not missed a day since. It has been 6 years. The rebuild. I am going to go fast, because you already know I survive, and I would rather spend the words on what I turned into. Motel to a room in a house in Olneyville with 4 other people, and 1 bathroom, $400 a month. Thought. The blue basket went under the bed and my clothes stayed in it, because I did not own a dresser, and I did not want one. 8 months after I left, Danny called to tell me they had moved Ruth into a facility in Warwick. I called it the same day and asked to visit. I was not on the approved visitor list. The family had asked that I not be added. I passed the state exam for certified nursing assistant 9 months after. I walked out. $19.50 an hour. One afternoon, the woman in billing was drowning, and I said I could type. She said, "Prove it." After that, they gave me days in the office and nights in the field, which is a thing you can do at 29 and cannot do at 40. Then, 1 year and 8 months after that morning, I found one. I was entering timesheets, and I noticed that an aide had been paid for a Tuesday visit to a house in Woonsocket, at the same hours she had been paid for a visit to a house in Providence. Both signed. Both stamped. 1 woman. 2 houses. 22 miles apart. Same afternoon. I did not accuse anybody. I did the least dramatic thing in the world, and it is the reason I win. I wrote a memo. 4 sentences. 2 dates. 2 addresses. 1 question. I gave it to the billing manager, and I kept a copy, and I wrote in my own notebook that I had given it to her, and what time. 6 weeks later, a state auditor came out to the agency, and the billing manager brought her to my desk, and the auditor read my 4 sentences, and looked up at me and said, "Who taught you to write it like this?" I said, "Nobody." She said, "Do you have a degree?" I said, "I have 3 semesters and a box in somebody's basement." She laughed. She gave me her card. 8 months later, I took a job with the state, in the office that reviews the paperwork of the agencies that get paid to take care of people's mothers. That was 2 years and 5 months after the morning, with the basket. I was 30 years old. I had a badge, a state email address, and a desk with a view of a parking garage. And on my first day, I put a spiral notebook in the top drawer. And 9 months after that, I got a letter from a court. Stay with me. This is where it changes. 3 years, And 2 months after that morning, it was a Tuesday. In November, I checked my mailbox in the lobby of my building on the way in from work, and there was a windowed envelope from the Providence Probate Court. I opened it standing up, next to the mailboxes, with my coat still on, a form, a photocopy of a photocopy, with a docket number in the corner. Notice, to interested parties, estate of Ruth Ellen Vance. My grandmother had been dead for 5 weeks. I read it 3 times. I turned it over, in case somebody had added a human sentence on the back. There was nothing there. There had been a funeral, a wake, a burial, 11 people. Somebody saying a few words. Nobody called me. The only reason I found out at all is that a probate clerk is required by law to mail a notice to every person named in the will. And my grandmother had made a will 9 years before her first stroke, when she was 71 years old and sharp as a knife. I was in it. That is why that letter came. Not love, not decency, a statute. I want to tell you that I fell apart in that lobby. I didn't. I had spent 3 years learning professionally what a piece of paper does when it hits a person, and something in me had already stood up and gone to work. I went upstairs. I put the letter on the kitchen table and looked at it for 20 minutes without touching it. Then I got out a spiral notebook, and I wrote the date at the top of the page. And I wrote 6 p.m. Received notice from probate court. Ruth died September 22nd. I was not told. And then I wrote the second line. And the second line is the whole reason I am able to tell you this story today. Do not open anything else. Write the memo first. Here is where most of these stories cheat. I am not going to. I worked for the state. If I had wanted to, I could have sat down at my desk on Wednesday morning and typed my grandmother's name into a system I had a badge for. I did not. The first thing I did before I called a lawyer, before I ordered one document, before I opened anything at all, was write a memo to my supervisor. 1 page. A family estate matter had come to my attention. A relative of mine held a power of attorney and might have been paid as a caregiver. I was recusing myself from anything touching any of the names on the attached list. I asked her to acknowledge it in writing. She did, at 9:14 the next morning. I printed her acknowledgement, put it in a folder, and dated the folder. Remember that folder. In about 8 months, a lawyer in a very good suit is going to try to end my career with a single sentence. And that is the piece of paper that will be lying on the table when he does. Everything after that, I did as one thing only, an ordinary citizen named in her grandmother's will. That is not a limitation. That is the weapon. Any heir in this state can demand a full accounting of an estate. Any heir. You do not need a badge. You do not need a law degree. You need a form, a filing fee of $90, and the patience to wait 42 days. I filed on a Thursday. I paid the $90. 41 days later, a padded envelope arrived, and I sat down on the floor with my back against the couch and read it 1 page at a time. The pages. 41 pages. I am going to walk you through 4 of them, in the order I read them. Page 3. Distributions to beneficiaries. 4 names. Mine was one of them. Next to each name, in a neat little column, the amount that had been paid out. 0. 0. 0. 0. I tuned dough. The house on Wilbur Avenue had sold in March for $341,000, and not $1 had gone to anybody named in Ruth's will. Page 9. Payments made from the accounts under power of attorney, and there it was, a line item, repeating, a payee, a date, an amount, $440, $440, $440. Every Friday, going back years. That was the withdrawal on the bank statement. That was the thing I asked one question about. Standing at the counter watching a little white egg timer count down. That was the reason for the laundry basket. I asked what it was. She told me not to worry about it. 48 hours later, she put me on the street to keep me from asking again. Page 14. The care agreement. $22 an hour. 20 hours a week. Provider of services, my aunt. Signed on behalf of Ruth by her attorney-in-fact, which is the legal way of saying, signed by the same woman, wearing the other hat. 2 signatures. 1 pen. One afternoon at that kitchen table, while I was at the pharmacy, $440 a week, 260 weeks. From the day she signed it to the day my grandmother died, $114,400. Do not do that multiplication. I already did it for you. Here is what it means, instead. It means that for every week I sat up with her at 3 a.m. It means that on the Christmas, she told 11 people I was helping out while I figured out what I wanted to do. A payment posted that Friday for the work I did that week. It means the $28,800 bill she slid across that kitchen table was rent. In a house that was, at that exact moment, paying her $114,000 for me. She did not just take the money. She billed me for the privilege of earning it for her. Page 27. Same. Folder. Sound. Fall. 1 page further. The final accounting. Signed by my aunt. And above the signature line, in language that has not changed much in 200 years, a sentence saying that she declared, under the penalties of perjury, that every payment had been made for services actually rendered. She signed it. That signature is not a betrayal of me. Understand the difference. Because it is the hinge of this entire story. Everything up to page 27. She did to her family, in her family's house. Families forgive almost anything. Page 27. She did to the state of Rhode Island. I hired a lawyer in January. She works above a bakery in Providence, and she takes elder financial exploitation cases. I brought her 3 things in a blue laundry basket, not a briefcase, not a banker's box. I carried 6 years of my life into that woman's office in the same basket. It left the house in, and I set it on her conference table. 1. The estate's accounting. 41 pages. 2. The sign-in sheets. Here is what my aunt did not think about. 8 months after she put me out of that house, she moved my grandmother into a memory care facility in Warwick. A good one. Expensive. Missive. Every facility in this state keeps a visitor sign in sheet at the front desk. Everybody signs it. You cannot get past the second door without it. I requested those sheets through my lawyer as an heir. 11 days and $40 in copying fees. My grandmother lived in that building for the last 2 years and 5 months of her life. Somebody else fed her. Somebody else counted her pills. A licensed facility, billing the estate separately every month, and the care agreement, $440 a week for 20 hours of care inside a house. Never stopped, not 1 week, not 1 Friday. It ran the entire time. My grandmother was living in another building, 12 miles away. That is not a gray area. That is a woman billing an estate for coming to a house to take care of a woman who did not live in the house. And the sign-in sheets are in her own handwriting. Her name, her dates, in ink, at a front desk. In 2 years and 5 months, my aunt signed in 11 times. 11. 3. The notebooks. 14 of them. 98 cents apiece. 6 years of dates in ballpoint pen, written down every day for the entirely stupid, unstrategic, human reason that I was scared of getting her medicine wrong. 2,190 dated entries. Every one of them landing on a week that somebody else got paid for. My lawyer went through them for an hour, slowly, in silence, while I sat there. Then she got to a page, 4 years old, and she read a line out loud. 2:40 p.m. Lawyer here, with Bev. Ruth signed a paper. She asked twice what it was. Nobody told her. She stopped talking for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Okay," and she picked up the phone. Because that one line, written by a 24-year-old at a kitchen table at 11:40 at night, out of pure habit, about a thing she did not understand and did not think was important, is a witness account, written the same day that the power of attorney itself was signed by a woman who did not know what she was signing. And if the power of attorney is no good, then the hand that signed the care agreement had no right to hold the pen. The whole thing hangs from one sentence in a 98-cent notebook. If you have ever thought the small, boring, pointless thing you do every day does not matter, that nobody is ever going to care that you wrote it down, write it down anyway. That is the only advice in this entire video. Get a notebook. Write the date. Write down what happened. It is worth nothing today. It will be worth everything later. They can argue with you. They cannot argue with the page. The reckoning. I met my aunt one time. 12 voicemails in 9 days. Once the court told her an heir had demanded an accounting. I listened to all 12 in one sitting with a notebook open and wrote down the date and time of everyone, because that is who I am now. Not one of them contained an apology. There were 4 explanations, 2 crying jags, 1 long speech about how nobody knew how hard it had been for her, and at the end a message where she said, and I am quoting, "You are going to destroy this family over money. Nora, over money." I met her once. A diner on Reservoir Avenue, 2 in the afternoon. A booth by the window. My lawyer told me not to. I went anyway. Not to yell at her, not to hear her explain. I went because I wanted to look at her face when she found out the notebooks existed. She was already in the booth. She looked smaller. She had a coffee. She was not drinking. And she started talking before I had my coat off. How it had gotten complicated. How the lawyer had suggested the agreement. How it was all above board. How she had earned it. How nobody understood what she had sacrificed. I let her go for about 6 minutes. Then I put my hands flat on the table and said, "I am not here to argue with you. I am here to inform you. 3 things. Numbered. Out loud. 1. I am not asking you for anything. I have never asked you for $1, and I never will. The court is asking you. There is a docket number and a date, and you have 21 days. 2. On page 27 you signed, under penalty of perjury, that every payment was for services actually rendered. I have the facilities sign in sheets. In 29 months, you signed in 11 times. 3. I kept a notebook every day for 6 years. It is not a diary. It is dated. It was written the same day, and it starts the week I moved in. Then I stood up and put a $5 bill on the table for my coffee, because I was not going to owe her anything. Not even that. She said my name twice. And then she said the last thing she has ever said to me in person. We are family, Nora. And I said, you told me we don't bill family. And I walked out. I sat in that parking lot, and I did not cry. I put my hands on the wheel and breathed until they were steady. And then I drove back to work and finished a report about an agency in Woonsocket. And I did not tell one person at my office where I had been, what it cost her, plain language, no legal words. You have earned it. She fought it for 7 months. Her lawyer was expensive and good, and he had exactly one strategy. And I knew what it was from the first letter. At a hearing in September, he stood up and said the whole proceeding was a vendetta, that I was a state employee who had used official access to run down a private citizen, that everything I produced was tainted. It was the only play he had. My lawyer slid one piece of paper across the table, a memo, 1 page, written by me, dated 8 months earlier, before I had opened a single document, disclosing the whole matter to my supervisor and recusing myself from every name on the list. My supervisor's written acknowledgement stapled to the back, time-stamped 9:14 in the morning. I wrote that memo before I knew whether there was anything to find. He read it. He sat down. That is the whole reason I won. Not because I was clever. Because I followed the rules on a day when I had no idea whether the rules would ever pay me back. Here is what the court did. 1. It removed her as executor of my grandmother's estate. The judge did it in about 11 seconds. In a flat voice, the way you read out a parking regulation. She stood there in a beige cardigan and had the pen taken out of her hand. 2. It voided the care agreement from the day it was signed and ordered her to repay the estate $114,400 every Friday she ever cashed. Called back. 3. The state's Elder Services Unit, where I filed a citizen's report on a form anyone watching this can download in 90 seconds. Ran its own investigation and issued a written finding of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which means her name is on a list now. It is a short list. It is permanent, and what it means is simple. In this state, for the rest of her life, that woman can never again be paid to take care of anybody's mother. She sold her house in East Greenwich to pay the estate back. She did not go to prison. The criminal referral is still sitting somewhere, and I have stopped asking about it. But every dollar went back, and the estate was settled properly, under the will my grandmother actually signed when she was 71, and sharp as a knife. Then I filed one more thing. The claim. An estate has to pay its debts before it pays its heirs. A person who provided 6 years of services to the deceased is a creditor. So I filed a claim against my grandmother's estate for the care I actually provided. 6 years, 312 weeks. And when my lawyer asked what hourly rate to claim, I told her I did not want to pick one. I told her to use theirs. $22 an hour, 20 hours a week. The exact numbers my aunt typed into that agreement at the kitchen table while I was at the pharmacy buying my grandmother's pills. $440 a week, 312 weeks. $137,280. I did not choose that number. She did. I corrected the name on it. The estate paid it in March. I have never once called that money winning. It is not winning. It is a receipt. It is the state of Rhode Island writing down, in a public document with a docket number, the thing my family sat at a Christmas table and declined to notice, that the woman in the kitchen was working After, she did not go quietly. They never do. That is the part nobody warns you about. The person who took everything from you will be sincerely, genuinely wounded that you noticed. She came to my building once, in October, and stood in the lobby, holding a folder of photographs of my grandmother, and asked the man at the desk to call up. He called up. I said no. She stood there 20 minutes and left. She sent one email. I still have it, because I keep everything now. 4 paragraphs. How she gave up her own life for that family. How my mother would be ashamed of me. How I destroyed a family over money. There is no apology in it. Not one line. Not one word about 6 years or a laundry basket. Or a bill for $28,800. Or a woman signing in at a front desk 11 times in 29 months. I read it twice. Then I wrote back, and my whole reply was one sentence. And it is the only cruel thing I have ever done in my life. And I would do it again. You told me, we don't bill family. The state does. Then, I archived the thread, and I went back to work. There was no reunion. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this one have lied to you a lot. Nobody came to the door with a casserole and tears. My uncle has not spoken to me. 2 of my cousins blocked me. There are people who sat at that Christmas table who sincerely believe, tonight, that I am a vindictive woman who sued her own grandmother's estate. I did not get my family back. I got my time back and my name back, and those turned out to be the only 2 things I actually wanted, and they were never in that family's power to give me anyway. What I got instead was Danny. He drove up from Warwick in April and stood in my doorway holding a cardboard box. And he said, I took this out of the basement before they sold the house. I didn't know why. I looked at the side of it. Somebody had written the word nursing on it in marker 6 years earlier. Big, block, letters, a 22-year-old's handwriting. I made him coffee. We sat on the floor, because I still only owned 2 chairs. I opened the box. 4 textbooks. 1 binder. $12 in change, in a coffee can, and underneath the binder, at the bottom of a box that had sat on a shelf next to the Christmas decorations for 6 years, was a small spiral notebook, 98 cents. The same kind I bought at the pharmacy on Broad Street. It was not mine. It was hers. Ruth kept lists in the last year. She could still write huge tilted letters, 3 or 4 words, to a line, grocery lists. The names of her pills, spelled wrong. She had put her notebook in my box. I do not know when. I do not know if she meant anything by it. The last page with anything on it has 4 lines. It took me a long time to read them, because by then, her hand was very bad. Bread, flour, call the pharmacy. Tell Bev. No, Nora stayed. 2 words. In pencil. In a notebook nobody was ever supposed to find. Written by a woman who could not remember what day it was, and never once got confused about who was in the room. Nora stayed. I paid for her headstone. In June, the estate had been frozen for a year and a half, and nobody had put one up. So my grandmother had been lying in the ground for 2 years under a little metal marker with a number on it, like a filing system, granite. Her name, her dates, and 1 line. I chose myself. 4 of us came. Me, Danny, my lawyer, and Yolanda, who drove 40 minutes on her day off in the rain to stand at the grave of a woman she had never met, because that is what she is like. Afterward, in the parking lot, Yolanda looked at me for a long moment and said, "You wrote it down." I said, Every day, she said. I know you did, baby. That is the closest thing to a victory speech anybody has ever given me, and I would not trade it for a room full of applause. I still have the basket. It is about 10 feet from where I am sitting. Blue, plastic, cracked handle, the kind you carry wet laundry in. She handed it to me on a kitchen floor at 7:40 in the morning, the way you hand a stranger a garbage bag. And she meant it as the last word on exactly how much of a life she thought I had. Everything you are fits in here. Take it and go. 5. Shirt. Samendefandau. 2 pairs of jeans. My mother's watch. And 14 notebooks she never once thought to look inside, because it never occurred to her that the person doing the work might also be the person keeping the record. I carried that basket out of that house. Then I carried it up a flight of stairs to a lawyer's office above a bakery and set it on a conference table. And everything inside it was true. She thought she was handing me the measure of my life. She was handing me the evidence. If somebody has ever decided out loud in your own kitchen exactly how small you are, hear the only thing I actually know, with a badge in my drawer and a headstone paid for, and my grandmother's handwriting in a box under my bed. They get to decide what they hand you. They do not get to decide what you carry out in it. Write it down every day. Doesn't matter if it is boring. They can argue with you. They cannot argue with the page.